Okay, welcome. It is so my children's program that usually is on Tuesdays is done for the season. So I'm in the car. So today I was thinking, once I stop shivering because it's a little bit cold, that we could explore what it is that we really want and uh, where and how we can find that. Seems like a pretty fundamental thing. So makes sense to explore that. So this question of what do we really want, I think, is a very useful question to ask ourselves, because if we don't have clarity on what we really want, then we might spend an entire lifetime pursuing something that we don't really want. Or at the very least, we might pursue all kinds of things that we sort of want, but that aren't really going to give us what we really want. And so, speaking from personal experience, I have pursued an awful lot of things without clarity about what it is that I really want. And in some sense, I suppose that well, I'll just say that it seems to me that, as I've already said, so I'll repeat myself, having clarity on what we really want, from my view, is a very helpful thing. So my observation is that we can have two categories of motivators for what we want. One, which I think is often in the minority, so I'll mention that one first, is a positive vision. So we have some kind of sense of something that, well, it's like the classic we talk about, there's a carrot and a stick. Okay, so one motivator is the carrot. We have something that we desire, that is a positive thing that we want to move toward, or that we want. So that's a motivator. There's something that we have an affinity for, or an attraction to. But as I say, I think that's in the minority of motivators in terms of practically what motivates us. I think for the most part, most of us are motivated largely, primarily, by the stick, whether we're aware of that or not. So that's very reactive. It's not proactive, it's reactive. So there's something that we perceive that is bad or undesirable, and then we want to move away from that. Now, we might construct something that we perceive as a carrot, something that we perceive will be the solution, that will be a good thing that we want to move toward. But what I'm suggesting is that if we're not really clear on what it is that we actually want, then we may be deluding ourselves, and we may be generating a lot of unnecessary either suffering or just wasting our time, in a sense. So first and foremost, I think it's really useful, I've found it useful, to get clear on what is motivating me. And when I'm really honest, I'll see that a large, overwhelming, I would say, amount of the motivation is the stick. What I don't want, what I want to get away from. Now, this is my perception of this, and I could be wrong. My perception of this is that this is not something that we generally talk about, and it's not. You know, I've been sharing this whatever you know, my marketing isn't so great when it comes to this kind of thing. I've been sharing this message. I don't even know what it is that I'm sharing. Okay, that's how terrible my marketing is. I don't even know what I'm sharing. But I've been sharing this for 7 years. Okay, and in that time, one of the challenges that I've had is that I tend to speak of these things, or I tend to address maybe more often than not the stick, the negative, the what it is that we've been trying to avoid. And we call that by many names, depends on the person and the day and how they're perceiving it. We might call it anxiety, we might call it self-hatred, we might call it fear, we might call it apparently my brain's a little slow this morning. It's kind of odd. We might call it a lot of things, okay? And what I've noticed is that when I have tried to advertise or promote this, whether that's through flyers or books or emails or whatever, any method, that it doesn't get the kind of reception that I, in my naivete, had imagined that it might, because I think, well, somebody who is a fairly successful marketer, who I shared this with at one point, he said, well, it's because because you're talking about things that people feel shame about. Nobody wants to tell anybody else about that. You know, somebody might get great benefit from it, but they don't want to go out and tell the world, hey, I just got great benefit from this thing, because they don't want to tell anybody that they were struggling with anxiety or fear or paranoia or depression or any of these sorts of things. So it's easier to dress it up in the positive, right? That's why we talk about, oh, I want spiritual enlightenment, I want spiritual ascension, I want abundance, I want happiness, I want all these positive things. Now that's all fine. I don't have any problem with that, but it's just that when we more frequently, I've observed, spin these things in a false positive. Because I will say that actually nobody wants, say we say we want abundance, as an example, right? People talk about abundance. It's a thing. And I would say, you know, an observation I've made is, well, we have a great abundance. There's no lack of abundance. I think we just want a particular kind of abundance. But if we're not, you know, we're unhappy with the certain kind of abundance we have, maybe we have an abundance of anxiety. And then we're saying, I want abundance, I want abundance, because we've dressed it up as, well, my problem is that I don't have enough money. We don't want to see what's actually going on. We don't want to look at the anxiety or the depression or whatever. So it's because I don't have enough money, or it's because I'm not, because I don't have enough business success, or because I don't have enough fame, or I don't have enough cars, or I don't have enough vacation time, or whatever. So we dress it up as something that's a little, we start with something that's a little less uncomfortable for us to look at, because it's a little less uncomfortable sometimes just to say, oh, you know, if I just had more money, everything would be better, than it is to admit, you know, this anxiety is just really eating me up. I don't know what to do. So then, or it's easier to say, if I was spiritually enlightened, then everything would be great. So I'm just going to go for spiritual enlightenment. And we want to just kind of shove a lot of stuff under the rug. So my experience with that was that I did that for many, many years. And what it did for me was it brought up an awful lot of anxiety. The more I tried to get away from the anxiety, the more anxiety I had. The more I tried to get away from the depression, the more depressed I was. The more I tried to get rid of the rage, the more rage I experienced. And I had all of these great attainments. I could sit in meditation for 4 or 5 hours at a time. I could do all kinds of things. I could even have some fancy experiences. But it wasn't actually giving me what I wanted. Because I wasn't being really honest about what was really motivating me, what I really wanted. See, because I didn't actually want, I didn't want spiritual enlightenment. Because my idea of spiritual enlightenment was, it was just a fantasy. And it was really just a fantasy that was layered on top of this avoidance of what I was trying to get away from. I just hoped that if I could layer enough on top of it, that it would give me enough buffer that I'd be able to avoid it. But I'm reminded of the story of the Princess and the Pea, which you may or may not know. It's one of those fairy tales. Okay, so very briefly, there's a prince wants to marry, but he has to marry a princess. This is very important, apparently. And I guess in those days, there were a lot of women pretending to be princesses who were wandering around, just wandering around, pretending to be princesses. So they wanted to have a plan for how they would know for sure if this potential bride was in fact a real princess, not a fake princess. And they devised a plan. Well, apparently, little known fact, princesses can detect a pea underneath 100 mattresses. Who knew? And so they devise this plan. They put a pea under 100 mattresses, and then they have these princesses sleep on the mattress and on top of the 100 mattresses, and then if they don't complain, then they know this is a fake princess. And lo and behold, along comes a real princess. She sleeps on the mattresses, and then they say, well, how did you sleep? And she says, oh God, it was so uncomfortable. There was just something underneath me all night long that was bothering my sensitivities. So then, happily ever after from there on. So I'm just reminded of that because I think in some sense we're all like that. We're all like a real princess because we try to buffer ourselves from what's really motivating us, which is the pain. But then we actually can't fool ourselves because we're real princesses. And so that pea is always there bothering us, and we can't get real rest. That's what we want, right? We want to really be at rest. Okay, so there I've given it away. That's what we really want. But we want rest, and we can't get rest because something always bothering us. So in order to have the rest, we have to first and foremost, I think it's my experience, we have to get clear on and be really honest with ourselves about what is really motivating me. Because I think I've been giving my attention to something, thinking that's going to do it. You can spend all day looking at stuff on the internet, and you can go from it's designed this way. It's so that you go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. You go from, you start out looking on Amazon, and then you're going through some recommended books on Amazon. You start out thinking, I want, today I really want to learn. I wonder if there's some other book about Nisargadatta. And you type in Nisargadatta and you get some recommended books or some advertised books, and you're like, hey, that looks like an interesting one. And you say, I never heard of that author. I'll Google that author. You Google the author, you go to their website, watch some of their videos, you go to YouTube, then you go to somebody else's videos, then you see an advertisement on YouTube, and you're like, hey, that sounds really interesting. You go and you look into that, and then you're like, yeah, that product, I'm going to see if there are any reviews on that product. And then you just go round and round and round. At the end of the day, you don't know what has just happened to you, but you have suddenly signed up for some program, and God knows what it is. You're going to do the Wim Hof method now. So you find yourself in, for the next couple of weeks, you're dunking yourself in, you fill up your bathtub with ice cubes, and you get in there and you're hyperventilating, and I'm getting somewhere. It's going to solve all my problems, and I'm going to be so happy, so happy. But it rarely works. And not to knock the Wim Hof method or Nisargadatta or whatever. I mean, maybe they're fantastic for some people. But I'm just suggesting there's a more direct route. So first of all, what is the real motivator? And I find the easiest way to get clear on what the real motivator is not to think about it. Thinking about it is like what I just described. The internet is just think about it. The internet is basically an extension of our own thinking. I mean, it's just like you can do with Google what you would do without Google if you were thinking, right? So you could sit and think and think and think and think and think and think and think, and that wouldn't help you out because you would just have so many thoughts about it, so many theories. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's Jesus, maybe it's Buddha, maybe it's Allah, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's that, maybe I should, maybe I should join a Tibetan Buddhist thing instead of the Chinese Buddhist thing, or maybe I should do whatever. You think about it a lot, and it doesn't give you what you're really wanting. So I wouldn't propose that thinking is going to be the solution, but what I have found is very effective is to just do nothing. So if I do nothing, then the reason I find this effective is because then I get right to the heart of what it is that's motivating me. Because what's motivating me, it's not out there. It's not some other thing. It's something very intimate. It has to be. I mean, I hope that's clear. That things out there don't motivate me. My own experience is my motivator. So even if somebody, like for example, somebody might call me names and throw cream pies at me and rob me and smash my windows and stuff, and then I could say, oh, that's them. It's they're doing it. Well, on some level, there's some truth to that. I mean, they're definitely behaving in a cruel way. But ultimately, it's my experience that is the thing that matters to me. Because if I was incapable of experiencing pain or discomfort, then it doesn't matter what a person does, it doesn't bother me. So it's my experience of it that bothers me. Now, just to be clear, I mean, there's kind of an extreme example I gave. So I'm not proposing that I think that it is always or often or hardly ever advisable to allow others to abuse us, but oftentimes our, if we're really honest, our ideas about what real abuse is are kind of distorted. So, short of physical abuse, theft, uh, vandalism, things like that, anything that's short of real, actual harm, I would say is not abuse. So somebody calling me names and saying mean things, that's not actually, I don't see that that's a real problem. I see that that's, for me, maybe for that person, it's a problem. But it's my experience that's my perceived problem. So if I do nothing, then I get closer to what's actually motivating me, because I'm getting closer to, I'm not actually getting closer to, but I'm sort of, let's say, withdrawing my attention. So my attention is normally far out, right? It's on objects, it's on things. So if my attention is out there, and my neighbor is making a bunch of noise, and then my attention goes over there, and my attention is saying that noise is the problem. So how much power do I have? Well, none. I could go over and I could talk to the neighbor, depending on the neighbor and the relationship. Maybe that would be helpful. But, like, for example, I had a neighbor a little less than 15 years ago. I've probably told this story before, who was running his generator outside my window, my bedroom window, at 7 in the morning. And I went out and I thought politely, asked if he could just move the generator a little further away from my window, and he told me that he would not do that. And in fact, if I brought it up with him again, that he would, I think his words were that he would smash my bones and blood into the pavement. So, I don't have a whole lot of control over the neighbor making noise. So what I can do, though, is I can do nothing. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that we should always avoid communicating. I don't believe that at all. I think communicating can be a very useful thing. But fundamentally, especially, so I'll give another example. Okay, so many years ago, I had a neighbor who this was when I lived in an apartment. And there was a neighbor who went to work and left her dog in a crate in her apartment all day, and the dog would bark and 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 bark. And I really didn't like that. So there's an example. What am I going to do? There was nothing. I didn't have any control over that situation. It wasn't illegal. Animal control was not going to get involved. The woman wasn't going to do something differently. The dog wasn't going to do something differently. I wasn't going to move. So there we were, me and the dog all day, and the dog barking. And so in these kinds of situations, it's clearer, okay? And we all find ourselves in these kinds of situations. So there's something happening, and our attention can go to that because it tends to go out toward objects. That's what it does. So then it goes to the object, the sound of the dog barking, the thoughts about the dog barking, and then it's trying to solve this problem, trying to solve this perceived problem. So then there I was sitting in this apartment, dogs barking, and my attention going to that. This situation where I have no power at all, but I'm scheming and strategizing on how I can somehow gain power to solve this perceived problem, thinking that if I can do that, then I'll get what I really want. Turned out not to be true at all. took me another 10 years of that same kind of behavior before I finally discovered what I'm, in a very long-winded way, saying today, which is that then, which I wouldn't bother saying at all, except that because, you know, there's a little thing in my mind that says I'm the only one that was ever that ever suffered from this. But then I know that that's not true, because I just see that a lot of people struggle with this. It's like how it's a very common thing. So that's why I'm talking about it. So it seems like a really simple, obvious thing maybe, but it's really very, very useful to recognize and life-changing. So even though it's very simple, it's very powerful. So I can just notice that I can get really, I have a habit, as many people do, of having attention go to objects being anything that is out there, anything that can be objectified. So sounds, people, places, things, thoughts, etc. And so the attention goes to these things, trying to solve a perceived problem, thinking that that's going to give me what I want. So this is the basic formula. And it doesn't work. Because how many, you know, even if we have, so I don't know what the average ratio of success to failure in terms of problem solving is for humans, but even if we're very, very successful in solving problems, it doesn't matter, because we don't get what we really want. We solve a problem and then we've got another problem. So at a certain point, I think it's wise for us to wonder, why do I keep having so many problems? And I'm suggesting we have so many problems because we're avoiding what's really motivating us. And so we're not clear on what we really want. And so we're out trying to get what we want without clarity of what we want. And therefore we don't get what we want. In fact, everything we do causes us to look everywhere other than where what we want is. That's the wild thing. So, and I know I haven't really, we haven't gotten to that in this long-winded explanation yet, but where we're going with this is that what we want is not an object. So if our attention is chronically going to objects, thinking that if it can get an object or move an object or affect an object or acquire an object or do something with an object, that will be satisfying, then it's never going to work. And in fact, the more we do that, the more we're looking everywhere other than where what we really want is going to be found. So as I said, first and foremost, I find it's very helpful just to do nothing. Of course, then we have to get clear on what does that mean to do nothing. So that's another thing to explore and take a look at, which we can do. But the one point I want to make before we do that is that this seems to apply to a hugely varied assortment of of things. Okay, so seems to, I mean, my experience is that this applies, what I'm describing seems to be helpful when it comes to health problems, seems to be helpful when it comes to relationship problems, seems to be helpful when it comes to anxiety, seems to be helpful when it comes to sound sensitivity, it seems to be helpful when it comes to money problems, seems to be helpful when it comes to career problems, seems to be helpful when it comes to problems involving anger, seems to be helpful when it comes to problems involving fear. So there's an awful lot of different types of problems that it seems to be applicable to. So if I, so what do I mean when I say do nothing? Because that's, I understand that that in and of itself can generate confusion. I remember I read a book. This must have been like 2001, 2002, in that time frame, called "Doing Nothing." I think is what it's called, by Stephen Harrison, which I thought I enjoyed. It was a very enjoyable book for me at the time. I don't know if I would enjoy it now. And so that was very intriguing, and it was around that time that I was also becoming, I think, it might have been just after that actually, that I started to learn about, became familiar with Gangaji. But this was something that I started to be curious about, doing nothing. How is that possible? What is that? What does that mean? So I started to see that I was doing a whole lot of something, and that wasn't really giving me what I wanted. So I was curious about this doing nothing business. But then how on earth does somebody do nothing? So initially I thought, well, maybe I need to stop doing something. I need to somehow restrain. So restraint, just so you know, is not it. Restraint is restraint is just unpleasant and intense and stressful, and that's not it. Then I thought, well, maybe if I just sit and sort of blank out my mind, that will be it. But that wasn't really it either, and it never really was successful in that anyway. So it took me a long time, relatively long time, to get any kind of clarity on what it is to do nothing. And so I'll share with you, and anybody, people who are here today in live in attendance, I think this won't be anything new to you. You've heard me say this before, but sometimes hearing something, even if it's the millionth time you've heard it, sometimes it clicks in a new way. So I'll say it. And then for anybody who's watching the recording, maybe it was the first time they've ever heard it. So doing nothing, what I discovered as an entry point for doing nothing, is just to explore what is it that I'm doing, and to see in subtler and subtler ways how it is that I make effort. And what I saw, or what I see fundamentally, is that all effort comes down to some kind of exertion, some kind of tension. And I experience it as a physical tension, but it sometimes is so subtle, it's hard to really differentiate between physical and psychic and spiritual and emotional. I mean, it's hard to really say that there is a real boundary between those things. So I wouldn't recommend anybody get hung up on trying to differentiate between those things. I would just say observe quietly your own experience, not the content of your thoughts, although it doesn't, I'm not suggesting anybody should suppress their thoughts. The thoughts are fine, but you can just notice that you have this capacity to give your attention to the content of thought, or just to observe the mechanics of thought as the thought comes and goes. And the latter is, I found, much more fruitful. So just to observe your experience without trying to suppress any of it or control any of it. And what I suspect you will discover, because it's what I've discovered and what many other people have reported to me that they've also discovered in exploring this together, is that as you observe, you'll just notice that fundamentally all of this stuff that we've complicated by objectifying it out there and differentiating into all of these objects, with all kinds of thoughts and theories and all kinds of solutions that we think we have to implement, in fact, all comes down to just making what turns out to be unnecessary effort. And maybe initially this is sometimes harder to see, just because we're sometimes so active in all of this objectification and problem solving that we don't have the perspective to observe at a subtler level yet. But it does come with enough observation and enough patience. It seems like everybody so far that I've communicated with this about is able to recognize this. Just as I say, sometimes requires some patience. But if we observe our direct experience, then I think it's inevitable that we will discover that all that's actually happening is that there's some tension, some effort being made, and that sets in motion. It's like dominoes. When you set up dominoes to cascade, sort of like that. You know, one domino knocks the next one over. So there's a momentum to all of it that when we're in the habit of energizing these patterns, then they seem to have a reality, an independent reality. But in fact, if we are persistent enough in our observation, we'll see that that they don't have any, you know, in Newtonian physics, one of the laws of Newtonian physics is every action has an equal and opposite reaction. There's also, this might be a thermodynamic law. I don't remember now. It's been a long time, but there's also energy is not created or destroyed. Okay, it just changes form. So when we can see this in the dominoes, we set up a cascade of dominoes. Okay, so you set up all your dominoes in this pattern very carefully, because you know if you accidentally knock into one, then you got to start all over. Okay, so you get them all set up in this intricate pattern, and then what do? You don't have to go through and knock over each one individually. You just set it into motion, just tapping the first one, and then the whole thing goes. So where did that, it looks like this whole big complicated thing. It looks like this big pattern. You set it up elaborately enough, and it can look like anything. You know, I mean, you could think about what is like a movie. You go into a theater, or you don't go into a theater. You watch it on your phone, whatever. But you watch a movie. What is that movie? It's just a bunch of stuff that it's like it's fundamentally not any different really than a very elaborate cascade of dominoes. It's just a sequence of stuff, and you just set it into motion, and it's elaborate enough that you can think that it's this other thing, right? Because you're watching the movie. What is the movie? If you're watching it on your phone, what is it? It's the phone. Pixels. But you're thinking, oh, it's whatever you think it is. You know, it's the whatever you get engrossed in the story. So there's, if it's sophisticated enough, then we think that if it's big enough and sophisticated enough, then we can think that it's some other thing. But if we trace it back, we can see, well, actually it's just the phone, and I set it into motion by pushing that button. Not even a button, you know, it's just touching the screen. So in the same sort of way, we're doing that all the time. That's what I'm getting at, is that we're doing that all the time. We have these patterns, these habits that we've established or that have been established that are conditioned into us. And if we're not sufficiently aware of it, then we are entranced by it. And like the movie playing, we think that's this independent thing. It has an independent reality, that it is what it presents itself to be, and that's just how it is. But if we observe enough by doing nothing, so just observing what's actually happening within ourselves, then what we can see is, oh, there's this elaborate pattern, this elaborate conditioning here. But in fact, that whole thing, like the cascade of dominoes, it's actually inert. It actually has no independent power. It actually is only powered by me tapping it. So you can see that. So back to the example that I gave with the dog. Okay, so the dog is barking in the apartment building next door. I'm sitting in my apartment, and I've got this whole. I was consumed by this. You know, every time the dog would bark, I was just enraged, and every time the dog wasn't barking, I was anxious the dog was about to bark again. And my attention was on the dog and the dog barking and this whole story. But knowing what I know now, it's really clear. I can just do nothing. I can observe my own experience, and it becomes very clear. Oh, that doesn't have an independent existence. That whole thing that I thought was out there, that had power over me, that I had to solve in order to get what I want, that whole thing, that was actually, it's like, what is that? It doesn't have any power of its own. It doesn't have independent power. I power it. And even though it can seem like this very elaborate thing, like set up this, you know, whole room full of cascading dominoes, very elaborate, looks amazing. But what sets that into motion? What is the power that powers the whole thing? It's just one tap. Where does that tap originate? Here. Who does that? Me. So in the same way, how is it that the dog barking is actually causing a problem? It's not. When I observe, what I can see is that what's actually happening is that there's this cascade that originates with me making effort, doing something. And that is an unnecessary effort. And so when I get clear on that, then what I recognize. So for me, it's a clenching. It's a subtle tension that cascades into what seems like a much bigger thing. And like I said, this has been true of everything so far. Every problem that I have perceived that I've had, whatever it is so far, whether it's anger, fear, relationship issues, financial difficulties, sound sensitivities, health problems, all of it so far comes down to this. So I observe, I recognize that I'm setting that into motion. It cascades in a way that it appears to have this independent reality, that appears to be big, that it appears then that I have to wrestle with. But in fact, it's just this little thing that I do. So when I do nothing, it reveals, first of all, what's the real motivator. The real motivator is this very intimate discomfort. I think it's about the dog. I think it's about that person. I think it's about the sound. I think it's about money. I think it's about whatever. I think it's about anxiety. I think it's about all these things. But in fact, when I observe, I get clear that the real motivator is this discomfort. And in fact, the more I observe it, it's so subtle. It's hard to really. My mind can't even figure out why would this be a problem. Can't even really find it. So my mind isn't really all that helpful to me at this point. I have to just do nothing, just observe. And I observe quietly, and I notice, oh yeah, there's that little thing. Little thing. And that little thing, what I find is that it's if it were to speak, or if I was to ask it a question of what is your purpose? Okay, so I'm not saying that this is how it actually works, but it's the best I can describe it. If I was to say, what is your purpose? It would say to protect. So when I was a kid, there were some, I think almost exclusively boys. I can't think of any girls that did this. There were some boys who thought it was funny on the playground to come and take a swing at my face and stop short and then laugh and say, ha ha, made you flinch. So it's like that. It's a flinch. It's this thing that It's, of course, it's to protect. So that's my experience of it. Is there's a flinch, subtle, and it's to protect, which is why I think it has well, I think this is why sometimes people find it very helpful. So I'll say many people do not find it particularly helpful to do an inquiry and discover that there is no separate self. On the other hand, some people do seem to find that very helpful. And I would say that most likely for those who do find it very helpful, it's probably because what it reveals to them is that there's no need to protect. So, for people who do that kind of inquiry and then they don't find it beneficial, it may be that discovery on it in a broad sense is not useful, but that for some people that discovery points them to a subtler or related discovery, which is that there's no need to protect. Because we are able to we are able to I don't know what the right term is. I'll use a couple of terms that are not quite correct. We could say subvert or overcome certain kinds of conditioning. So almost everybody, I believe, let's say we built a device that reliably, it's a mechanical punching device, okay? So it punches, and it always punches to the same depth to the millimeter with millimeter precision. So most people, you could, get within an inch, put your eye within an inch of that. And most people, every time the thing punches, they're going to blink, they're going to flinch because it's just what's conditioned. But I would say everybody is capable, if they know that they're actually safe, if they know that they're not actually going to get punched, that they're capable of discovering how to undo or subvert that conditioning so that they don't blink. We could probably all imagine that that's a possibility. Depending on your particular tolerance for that kind of thing, it might be harder or easier to imagine. But the point is that there is if we have a sense of safety. So also, for example, like some people, they go swimming and they can open their eyes underwater. Some people find that difficult. Some people find, we've got all kinds of reactions to things. Some people find it easier and some people find it more difficult. But even if you find something difficult, you can almost always, if you're really determined, you can find a way to subvert that conditioning. The sort of reflexive or reactive conditioning. So in the same way, what I'm proposing is with enough quiet observation on what it is that is really motivating us, then we can get clear on what it is. We can get clear that it's something we're doing, that it kind of fundamentally comes down to self-protection. It's a flinching or contraction that's subtle, that cascades into something less subtle, in its essence is very subtle, and it's something that when we observe quietly, and then if we wish to and we persist in this, that we can explore to discover that we are in fact safe and able to release that, so that we are no longer have a sense of obligation to flinch or contract or self protect. And the good news from my perspective is that that already there offers us exactly what we want. So when we stop, so we've probably heard this before. It's not an uncommon thing for people to say, but it usually, I'll say what it is. Oftentimes people will say, well, when you stop seeking, then you'll find. And, or some variation on that. Seeking is the problem. And it's true, but just stated like that, I never really quite got it. Never really understood. It's a nice idea, but couldn't really understand how that would be possible. What I'm pointing at is that if we observe, we can actually see how it's true that what we really want in our actual experience, we can just look and see, okay, I've been trying to get something my whole life. And whatever that something is, I don't have to have an exact word for it. It doesn't matter. But what I can see is that I've never actually succeeded in having that for any length of time. It's at best been fleeting. At worst, we've never even experienced it at all. But at best, it's been fleeting. So we can recognize in our own experience that we've never been able to have it for any real length of time. I mean, there are rare occasions in which people seem to, well, they think that they have it for a while. But even then, it eventually goes. So we can see that we're never able to really possess it, whatever it is. So, and we can use our imagination, because we've had enough experience, we can use our imagination to recognize, I don't think I'll ever actually get it. I don't think I'll ever actually succeed. All these things I can kind of like, in my imagination, I can follow all of my ideas to their logical conclusion. If I had $1 billion, would that do it? No. If I had an entire harem of wives, would that do it? No, that wouldn't do it either. Okay, if I was emperor of the world, would that? No, shit, that wouldn't do it. If I had perfect health always, would that? No, that wouldn't do it either. So what exactly is it that I'm looking for? And I can see that none of my proposed solutions will give me that. So what is it really that I want? And if I really am honest, I can see, well, what I really want is to not want. I really just want fulfillment. So seeking doesn't give me that, and no amount of trying to shove stuff into this bottomless pit seems to do that. So I can see that that's so. And then if I do what I've been proposing, to observe quietly my direct experience, to see what is my real motivator in all of this, then what I'm suggesting is that I in this moment of quiet observation and the exploration of I'm using term that I'm not happy with, but I don't know another better term today, so I'll just use it again. The quiet observation and then the subversion of that habit of flinching. What I discover in that instant is the fulfillment of my actual desire, the fulfillment of fulfillment. In this one instant, I don't desire anything. I don't need anything. I'm not seeking for anything. I'm not wanting anything. I don't have a sense of lack. I don't have a sense of insecurity. Fundamentally, that's really what it kind of reveals, is that this seeking for fulfillment was actually always based upon a sense of insecurity. So fulfillment wasn't even the right thing. It was all based upon this idea, this faulty idea, that I'm insecure and that I need something to reinforce myself so that I can be secure. But in this instant of exploration, I can discover that there is the whole premise of insecurity is false. So I don't know if I've done a good job or a bad job in describing this, but I can say this. What I have just described, genuinely, honestly, truly, I believe is one of, if not the most valuable things that I've ever discovered. And that I think that I think that that is one of the most valuable things that a human can discover. It is life-changing. It's very simple. It's not showy. It's not kundalini blasting out of your eyeballs. It's peace. And it doesn't negate anything else. So I'm not opposed to kundalini blasting out of people's eyeballs. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, maybe if I was experiencing it, I would have a problem with it. It doesn't the way I'm just half jokingly describing it, it doesn't sound nice at all. Um, but I don't. None of those things are a problem, I don't think. So I'm not saying that those things are bad and nobody should want those things. It's like I'm sharing something that I've discovered with you and that I'm saying is the most valuable thing, but that does, at the same time, I still eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I still sleep at night. I still talk to my children and my wife when when trying to work through challenges and things. So it's like it doesn't negate anything. All of the rest of life is still happening, but as a foundation for a good life, I think honestly, it's just to me, it is the foundation for a good life because it is clarity on who I am, what I want, and where it is. And the answers being who I am is what's already given. What I want is this, and where it is and is here now. Such a like I said, it's so simple and unassuming, but it is life-changing because it reveals what the nature of suffering is, and that suffering is 100% optional. Because suffering is simply uh, setting a, energizing this cascade and then simultaneously saying no. That's it. It's not actually, there is no real suffering. It's just, that's it. It's just energizing this conditioning, this cascade, and simultaneously fighting against it, and thinking that that's that there's a problem there. But the the amazing power of what I've been talking about is that it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter what the cascade is. It doesn't matter if it's cascading. It doesn't matter if it's not cascading. It doesn't matter if there's resistance to the cascading. It doesn't matter at all, because there's clarity on what's actually happening. It's like it's no more of a problem than the a sunflower sprouting or eating the sunflower. Like it's not a problem. It's just what's happening. And if I'm unhappy with it for any reason, then I have the clarity to just be and the capacity to do nothing, because then that's where I find what it is that I really want, rather than and I won't lie to you and say that I remember this every second of the day. There's still a lot of I still spin my wheels, but less and less, because this clarity grows, because it's so true and so restful and so appealing, that once having glimpsed it, then I know where the answer is. So I tend to turn to that more and more and more, rather than doing what I know is ineffective. Because I have conditioning that says, for example, you've got to work harder to make more money, and you got to make more money to have your needs met, and you got to have and you got all these needs, and you got to, and those are not questioned. So I've got that kind of conditioning still that plays out, but I see it more and more, and every time I check, this same thing that I've been talking about applies, and it is well, I feel extraordinarily grateful to have been graced with this discovery, because it makes a huge difference in my life. So that's why I share it. Anyway, it's 11:11, and I'm according to my clock, which means nothing at all, except that in this case, it means that I'm done talking for the moment. And if you have got anything you want to say, you can do so. The usual caveat applies. This is we're recording this. It will go on YouTube. Other people will see it. If you don't want other people to see you or hear you, then I guess you don't want to speak. But yeah, because everything that's in the video will go on YouTube. With that said, if you want to unmute yourself and say something, feel free to do so.
I gotta go, Joey. I'll see you next time.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming by.
You bet. Bye for now.
Bye.
I'll say something if nobody else is.
Yeah, go.
Very interesting. I feel kind of stupid because I still don't get it. And you've been telling me about this for years. And like I have glimpsed some things of what you've been saying. But I'm not quite sure how I did it, you know, sometimes, or sometimes I was more aware that day or whatever. And I saw how I did it then, but then I couldn't redo it. And it's just, I do see that what you're saying has value, but I don't like fully, you know, it doesn't fully click yet. And I think it will, but yeah, I feel kind of silly. Like I still struggle all the time. Like you're saying suffering is 100% unnecessary or whatever it was.
Yeah.
What was it? Voluntary? I can't remember what you said, but
Optional. Yeah.
No. Yeah. It feels like, yeah, most of the time, probably all of the time, I still struggle and suffer and can't, like, I don't know, find the peace or accept it or stop doing or stop projecting or have clarity or any of that. Like I just feel like such a newbie, even though I've known about this now for like 2 years or whatever. Still so hard. And it's as if it's like there's resistance almost to I want to say figure it out, but I don't know. Resistance to, you know, it's as if I want to suffer, you know. It's like every day there must be thousands of opportunities.
You don't want to suffer them. You just want to protect yourself.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not doing it because I want to protect myself or because I want to suffer. It's just kind of weird. It's like there must be 100 opportunities in a day where I'm suffering because of something.
Yeah.
And
easily.
You what?
Easily. I mean, I would say probably it's
thousands,
if not tens of thousands. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet it's like I just struggle with it every single time. It's like I feel like a victim, I suppose, you know. Not the opposite of that, which is kind of like what you're saying. It's as if you're like it's as if to me that you're saying you kind of have mastered your psychology or your internal experience, and you may not always be on top of it, but there's, you know, you've got to a point where you're more a master of it than a victim, you know. And to me it's like I don't even know how many times I could count on my hands, probably how many times I've somehow magically miracled to actually stopping making it worse or stopping creating it in the first place, or but the rest of the time it's just terrible victim stuff. So
well, I a couple of things about that. One is the conditioned mind is very dismissive. It doesn't matter. At least mine is. I noticed that within seconds, usually even less than a second, some huge revelation or opening or insight or shift of some kind, and a palpable experience of greater freedom and ease. And then within a half second to 2 seconds, my conditioned mind has already dismissed it. Yeah, whatever, who cares? And it's just back, I got all these problems. It's like, what have you done for me lately? That's the conditioned mind. It's always, what have you done for me lately? And lately is like within the last half second. It's all it's interested in. So you could maybe just expect that that's just how it's going to be. And another thing I can say is, so I don't know the answer to this question. I don't suppose you know the answer to the question, but it's an interesting question to consider. How many people do you think actually, like what percentage of the population do you think actually ever have this experience?
What experience?
The experience of discovering that they are not a victim, or discovering that they are actually free. Even for half a second, how many people do you think actually have that experience? I think it's shockingly low.
Yeah. Maybe 1%.
Maybe. I don't know. I couldn't really quantify it, but I just get the sense that it's shockingly low.
Yeah.
Because
people I've met and interacted with it, based off my perceptions of them. Yeah. It's like using that as a sample. Yeah, not very many.
So the fact that so you've had that repeatedly.
But having said that,
Yeah. So you see what you're saying, but that's the conditioned mind that's dismissive. It says, yeah, but whatever, who cares?
Yeah, no, I totally know what you're saying. It's a very good point, but I just wanted to say that, for example, my boyfriend and my big brother, I've got a younger brother, he's not smaller, a younger brother and a big brother, and me and my younger brother are very neurotic, I would say. Very always worried and lots of fear and insecurity and lots of problems and stuff, and find it hard to cope with many things in life. And my big brother and my boyfriend are more similar to each other than us, and they so appear and even tell us that they're so, not really saying it in this way, but the opposite, not neurotic, secure, feel safe, not scared, at peace, really, like it's just able to cope, or like everything that we're not. It's just like, you bastards, like just, able to accept how they feel, they feel down, they accept it, it's gone, they move on, they don't cling to anything. And it's, what is wrong with me and my little brother that we do this, but it's conditioning, I guess. They had a better upbringing, whatever.
Yeah, and it doesn't, that's the thing, is it doesn't so what I've found is that I am, so yeah, there are definitely all different types, right? There are definitely people who are more anxious and less anxious. And it's sort of like that is it's really irrelevant. And the reason why is because, to the degree that a person suffers, doesn't matter. You could say, well, a person suffers 2% of the time, or they suffer 98% of the time. So good for the person who only suffers 2% of the time. Well, amazing, wonderful, very happy for them. But the same insight is still useful. And for the person who suffers 98% of the time, that insight is very valuable because it helps them 98% of the time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter, some people, maybe you're more anxious than other people, but it doesn't matter, because what I've noticed this also. There are many people who I know who seem to take life a little easier. They're not so uptight. They don't worry so much. They don't think so much. They don't suffer so much. They don't have so many problems. And I can get, I could, if I wanted, I could be concerned about that, and why, why is it they have that experience and I have my experience, and that's not fair. But what I found is that the more I get to know people, the more I find that in their own ways they struggle with this, and that this same insight is valuable to everybody. And it's just that some people aren't, their baseline isn't as anxious, their baseline doesn't involve as much suffering. But to whatever degree they have suffering, it's useful. I think it's a human, it's describing in some sense just what it is to be human. And so and then as far as the your sense that it sounds like you've had glimpses of it, you perceive the value of it, you would like to have greater clarity and be able to make more use of it. So I would say that from my perspective, the best thing to do is to observe. If you were just to do one thing, actually, here's something that I didn't say earlier that I think is useful. And this is a whole other discussion that would probably need, there's a lot of nuances and details to this. So maybe if I remember some other week, we can explore this. But but breathing is a useful, I don't know what to call it. We'll call it tool. It's not quite the right word. But if you observe your breathing, you will probably notice that when you're feeling anxious or stressed or worried or upset or frustrated, etc., stuff that you don't want, you'll probably observe that. So what I've been talking about, this clenching or flinching or tension, you'll notice that reflected in the breath. You'll probably notice that you're holding your breath, or that the breath is tense, or the breath is jagged or something. So the breath can be an interesting tool to use for observation, if you need, if you find it helpful to have something that you can observe that seems more like a thing. Because breath is interesting in that sense that it's something, it's kind of a thing and kind of not a thing. You can observe it as if it was a thing, but it's not a thing. So it's an interesting thing. It might be a useful thing to take a look at, because it might reveal to you the subtler layers of what I'm talking about. So you could just observe to notice, because so I've made this observation in the past that you may or may not recall, that well, it's a related thing, which is that the tension in the eyes and forehead also is also related. So that's another thing that you could see which is useful for you, or explore both or either. You could observe the forehead and eyes, or you could observe the breathing, and you could just see. So it's not that we need to work to have perfectly relaxed, even breathing and a relaxed forehead all the time and become really obsessive about that. That's not the point. But just to give something that you can observe rather than it being too open-ended. Those are, I think, useful things to observe because they will reflect to you that subtler flinching or contraction. And you could try it out because if your breathing is very smooth and easy, you will not have you won't be giving much attention to thought. And similarly, if your eyes and forehead are relaxed, you won't be giving much attention to thought. And not that thought is the enemy or a problem, but thought is, when we give our attention to thought, that's sort of like how we set the cascade into motion in some sense. There's a connection, I've observed at least, there's a connection between attention on thought and the contraction. So if there's a ease in the breath and relaxation in the forehead and eyes, tends to also release the fixation on thought, tends to also ease the self-protective contraction. And so then there's just an easier time observing subtler qualities of your experience.
And that's all you're doing is observing. You're not doing anything else.
Correct.
So even if you observing that doesn't change anything and you still have suffering or whatever, that's fine.
Well, if you, I guess you could experiment with it and then let me know if that, because that doesn't seem likely.
Right. So if you observe that you're holding on, clenching,
Mm-hmm.
you think observing that it will release somehow.
Well, maybe, probably, but even if it doesn't, it doesn't matter, because what I'm saying is that so is a cascade of dominoes a problem?
Is that like, I don't really know what that is, cascade of dominoes. It's thinking.
You set up a whole bunch of dominoes so they knock into one another.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
String of thoughts or something.
Yeah, anything, any cascade of action, reaction, is that actually a problem?
I suppose it's not a real problem. It's just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you have clarity on what's actually happening, then that's all it is. It's just discomfort. You suffer from it if there's discomfort and you think that you're a victim of it.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that the observation gives clarity, and it's very helpful to have repeated experiences of the release of that tension, because then you have the direct experience of that fulfillment already present. That's very helpful. But that fulfillment is already here. That's already the case. So we're not creating that. We're just revealing that through the removal of anything that obscures that. But once we know where that is and we have repeated experience and clarity around that, then we know that it's here. We don't need to manage our lives obsessively to try to create the conditions so that we can keep having the same kind of experience of it, because it's not as important anymore. So I certainly have a preference for certain kinds of experiences, and I now recognize that I have the power to choose more of those experiences, but I don't experience so much distress when I'm having other types of experiences.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's quite different then. Maybe. Because, oh my God, my mind can do crazy things, you know, beat yourself up that not experiencing the thing I want to experience, and like crazily chase after it and reject this because it's not that, and
I know.
I can't get it though. I just can't get it. Like right now, I can feel tension all over, and I just can't let it go. It's just like, and then I want to beat myself up that I can't let it go. It's just like,
well, try see what happens if you just observe the breath. I'll give you some tips on that. The main thing I would say is just, so you'll probably find it easier initially, and maybe always, but it definitely initially, to explore this lying down on your back. Just makes it easier. There's less muscular stuff involved. So you can just lie down on your back, and you can just observe your breathing. So just be aware of where in your body you feel the breath. What is the quality of the breath? Does it feel satisfying? Does it feel like you're not getting enough air? Are you straining for air? Are you forcing the breath at any point? So you're not, at this point, you're not trying to change anything, you're just observing. And as you observe, you can allow yourself just to notice where there's effort or strain in the breathing. So you can notice, for example, are you, like I asked the question, are you straining or forcing the breath, pushing out or working hard to inhale? And just through observation, allow yourself to let that soften so that your breathing becomes gentle. So it's not that you're trying to artificially produce what your idea of gentle breathing is. It's just that you're observing to note where it is that you're making strain or effort that may not be needed. And then you can just explore softening that. And then just allow the breath to become smooth. It's probably going to, for most people, most people will find that their breathing, the rate and perhaps the volume will reduce. And then when you're able to have a at least somewhat comfortable breath, then start to explore also, especially in the torso, where in the torso does the breath feel restricted? So notice in the front of the abdomen, in the front of the chest, the sides of the abdomen, the sides of the chest, the back of the abdomen, the back of the upper back. Because a lot of the time we're unconsciously holding tension that restricts the breath, and then we try to compensate for that unconsciously with strain and force. So our breathing becomes more strained and effortful than it needs to be. And then there's a lot of things usually going on. So if you just quietly observe in this way, it can help. It can help because it can help in a lot of ways. It's very revealing. And it does help to, there's a connection between your breathing and your thinking and your state of your feeling state. So if you are holding tension and compensating for that, then your thinking and your feeling state will reflect that. You'll notice if you just do this observation, you'll start to see the parallels between how you habitually breathe and how you habitually think and feel. And so it's also very helpful in that it gives you direct insight into where you are holding the tension and how to release that tension. It's challenging to release the tension. So, the self-protective reflex kicks in when you feel like you're unable to get a satisfying breath. If you're holding tension habitually and you're compensating for that, then what happens is you begin to get fatigued, but your brain is not going to necessarily recognize it as such. And so instead, it's going to produce anxiety, fear, worry, things of that sort. And then I give the instruction, well, notice where you're holding tension, and you start to realize, oh, I'm holding tension, but then you don't know how to release that tension, because that releasing that tension would trigger air hunger, which would provoke a fear of death. So, you could just imagine that if you're chronically, let's say, holding your upper back tense, that's going to restrict your rib cage so that you're not able to get a smooth, satisfying breath without straining. So you strain elsewhere in the body, whether that's in the collarbones or in the throat or in the abdomen, trying to compensate for that. You get fatigued because those auxiliary muscles are working over time. But then your brain doesn't know how to recognize that, because after a while, it's like the refrigerator is running, and after the compressor in the refrigerator is running, and after a while you tune it out. So the same kind of thing, if you're compensating by straining for long enough, your brain just tunes it out, and so you don't know what's going on anymore. But your brain is going to produce other symptoms because it's getting the feedback of this fatigue. So it's not going to correctly identify what's going on. Instead, it's going to produce anxiety or some other sort of symptom like that. But then you become aware. I pointed out, I said, well, become aware of tension in your body. You become aware of this tension in your body. And then I say, and then explore softening that. And you say, yeah, I don't know how to do that, because your brain's not going to let you do that, because you start to soften it. And what happens is all of a sudden you feel like you can't breathe. You feel like you're starting to suffocate, which triggers this programming in your nervous system of, holy shit, I'm going to die. So that's going to override anything else that you're doing. But so exploring the breath can be, I'm sorry, I forget to mention that a lot of the time, but it can be very powerful, because it can help to unravel that. And then you can start to release some of that chronic tension that you're holding, that is connected to your sense of survival. So it gives you greater access to your ability to release tension and to explore that edge. Because, like I said earlier, fundamentally, it always comes down to a sense of security, and there's a sense of insecurity. Like I'm not safe, I'm not okay. So that self-protective mechanism is to try and get security. It's the flinch when the punch is coming. And if that's too tightly wound up, then it's more challenging. So the more space we can have around that by releasing unnecessary stuff, especially with the breathing, it gives more space to then notice the subtler levels of that, where then you can just start to tune into, oh yeah, there's that subtler flinching going on, and I can explore releasing that, because there's still a sense of insecurity, but it's not as great. So then it feels like, okay, maybe I could explore that without feeling like I'm about to die.
Okay, thanks, Joey.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna go have lunch.
Okay.
But let me know how that, keep me posted on that. Let me know if that's useful exploration.
Yeah, thanks. I'm still thinking about what you said about the conditioning being Pavlovian as well, because I realized that I reject everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like one thing that I learned to reject. I suppose I reject discomfort, which is one thing, but it's in many forms. So I just wonder what happened and when. I wonder if
but we know that kind of stuff gets more and more generalized. The longer it goes. So that conditioning gets set in motion early in life, and then it's goes unaddressed, and it just starts to spread out because it gets connected to everything. The first time it happens, it had a trigger that had 5 qualities to it. It was soft, red, loud, and rough, or whatever. I don't know. It's got these qualities, and then but then every time it gets triggered by something that has one of those qualities, then that thing has other qualities to it. So then those things start getting added in too. So pretty soon, everything is a trigger for it.
But it's all really just a protection for what you don't want, or protection for discomfort, or
Well, yeah, and I mean, I like I said, I think fundamentally it comes down to insecurity. It's a sense that I'm not safe.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be safe, I need to. Well, from there, in order to be safe, then we set all of these conditions in order to have safety.
This is funny. I even had this glimpse of relaxation once, which I felt like is the first time I've ever relaxed in my whole life. And it scared us. I didn't like it at all.
Oh, yeah. I know.
What the hell?
Yeah. Right.
That was crazy. Like losing control, relaxing. Wow. It's not normal to be scared of that.
Oh, no, it is pretty normal. I would say that's very normal. Yeah. I would say it's extremely normal. I think it's rare that people are able to relax completely.
Maybe. Yeah. So that must be related to this conditioning, I suppose. Feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
While relaxing. Yeah. So it's just that safety thing again. It's like even a good thing can be bad if you feel unsafe. Yeah. Basically, it's just triggers, isn't it? It's just triggering you feeling unsafe, which when you're a baby, you could have 5 triggers, what you're saying. And then now I probably have thousands of triggers for that. I mean, everything seems to be.
Yeah. Right. That's what I'm saying. And so you can work, you can explore that from the outside in and from the inside out. The inside out is the is the most powerful, because that way when you have repeated experience of your fundamental safety, then that goes with you everywhere, regardless of what's going on, regardless of the conditions. And so then all of those things start to rapidly get decoupled, because you've got, like you're saying, you've probably got millions of triggers.
Mm.
But all of those, they all are decoupled because if you're living in your life, moving in your life, anchored in this recognition of where real security is found and what that really is, which does not depend upon any conditions, then that becomes your home. And anything that you're doing, anywhere you are, all these triggers are there, but they just are seen through. It's like, oh yeah, but see, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And it's not, you're not walking around affirming I'm okay, but it's clear you're referring to where you know that security is actually found. And so none of these things, it just is clear in your experience that none of these triggers have anything to do with anything anymore. It's just, you can see what is for what it is. It's not anything else anymore, which is why then, like I was saying, the dog barking is just a dog barking.
Mm. John Peterson would say that's cutting the head off the hydra. Instead of cutting all the snakes, you just cut the head off the hydra and all the snakes die.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers, Joey. That's great.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Let you get your lunch.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And thanks, everybody. See you guys next week. It's going to be